Welcome to another edition of the Trucking on Route 66 in Missouri Oral History Project, a collaborative initiative between the Missouri State University Libraries and OzarksAlive.com. I'm Tom Peters, Dean of Library Services at Missouri State University. My colleague on this oral history project is Caitlin McConnell from OzarksAlive.com. This project is made possible in part by a grant from the Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program of the National Park Service. Today's date is Tuesday, July 17th, 2018. We're in Lebanon, Missouri this afternoon at the Lebanon-Laclede County Library, just off of Old Route 66. Our special guest today is Carson Elliott. Carson, thanks for meeting with me.
Yep.
So your family ran a truck stop near here. Can you just kind of explain what it was, where it was?
The truck stop was Andy's Midway, and when they first bought it, they didn't really have a name, and it was open for about 6 months before they came up with a name for it. And one day, a couple of roadway drivers were in there, and they said, we're about midway between Springfield, Missouri and Rolla, Missouri. And that's kind of where the name Andy's Midway come from.
And what year was this?
It would have been in the late 50s when they bought it, either 58 or 59, somewhere around there.
58, 59, and they operated it till
about 1982 or so.
Okay, so that's about, what, 25 years, 24, 25 years. So you grew up?
I grew up listening to stories from my grandmother. My grandfather had already passed away, but my grandmother still told a lot of stories about the travelers that would come through and what things were like on Route 66 back then.
So what kind of stories did she tell you? Can you share some of them?
A lot of the ones I remember were just talking about the bartering, because a lot of people didn't have money when they would travel, and they would do a lot of trading and bartering.
Really?
You know, a guy might come with his family, and he might be moving to California or somewhere, and he didn't have the money to pay for all the food for the family, so he might trade him a pistol or something like that for, you know, the meal for all of them. Or they might not have enough money for the food and the gas, so they might trade them, you know, furniture or something like that, whatever they had. Traveling salesmen always had, you know, things to give out, things to trade. And
freebies and stuff that they'd trade
all their samples and things like that.
Yeah. So it was a truck stop, it was food, fuel.
Yeah, they had a repair bay also.
Yeah, okay. A lot of truckers, I'm assuming?
Yes, a lot of them.
You know, I don't know very little. I know very little about trucking, but there were more gas-powered trucks back in the 50s and 60s.
Right, diesels were kind of a new thing after World War II. That was kind of something new. There wasn't a lot of diesels on the road yet. A lot of things were still big block gas engines and things like that. And they weren't nearly as fuel efficient as the trucks are today, so they used a lot more fuel back then.
Yeah. Now this part of the Ozarks is not particularly hilly, right around Lebanon, but they would have gone through like Devil's Elbow going west.
Right.
I mean, did your grandmother ever talk about, you know, some of the stories the truckers would tell you about driving on Route 66 in those late 50s, early 60s?
Some of the things they would talk about was how slow the trucks would be pulling the hills, and they'd actually have to wedge a stick or something between the seat and the gas pedal. They'd be standing on the running board because inside the cab was so hot from the exhaust manifolds. So they'd be standing on the running board holding on to the steering wheel outside because it was so hot in the truck they couldn't stay together.
Climbing those hills.
Yep. And I mean, they were going up the hills at, you know, 15, 17 miles an hour. It's not like they were pulling at 40 or 50 mile an hour like we think about today. Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure there's it's probably a federal law. Now on interstates, when trucks get below the minimum, which I think is 45, they're supposed to turn on their flashers.
Yep.
Back then, did they even have flashers? They could have turned on.
No, most of it was still hand signals back then.
So just getting up and down the hills was a major part of it.
Right, and they also didn't have the speed. You know, the trucks wouldn't run as fast back then as they do now.
Right.
That was another big thing, because most of the trucks would gear out, you know, 45, 50 miles an hour or something like that.
Yeah. And loads were smaller?
A little smaller loads back then, like 70,000 would have been considered a big load back then.
Yeah. Do you know what kind of service was typically required? Was it mainly tires?
A lot of oil and lube, things like that, and topping like the water off because things would get hot and boil over, so you always had to top stuff back off.
Yeah. Now today, truck stops are pretty much 24/7 kind of operations. Was it that way back in the 50s, 60s?
A lot of the truck stops, and the people I've talked to would say that a truck stop wouldn't necessarily be open 24 hours a day, but a lot of times the door would be unlocked and there'd be like coffee made and might be pie there. And they might have like a little tip jar or something you can just throw a couple dollars in or something like that after you stop for a little bit and got some little bite.
So more of a trust going on there.
Yep.
The other thing I've heard, and I should know this, but there wasn't much credit back then. You either paid
either cash
or check.
Yeah, I mean back in the 50s it wasn't anything for a driver to leave home with $500 and go to California and come back and still have $150, $200 on him.
Right.
I mean, fuel was 12, 15 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
You can stop at a truck stop and get a milkshake and a burger and fries for 60 cents and leave a waitress a 10-cent tip or something like that. And that was, that was a common meal.
Yeah. Do you know what, have you ever seen a menu of what was on the?
I've never seen the Andes menu. I've never seen one of those.
Do you know what they served? I mean, was it?
It was just, they had a little bit of everything, because I know the first special that he had when he opened it was filet mignon.
Whoa.
And nobody around here knew what filet mignon was. So at the end of the day, he ended up pulling all the toothpicks out of the steaks and unwrapping the bacon.
Just calling them steaks.
Yeah. That was one of the things that my grandma talked about, was the very first special he had was filet mignon. Nobody knew what a filet mignon was. So.
Yeah. Do you know how big the restaurant was? How many seats? Or?
I don't know exactly how many seats. It wasn't a huge place by any means, but probably 25 or 30 people could have been in there comfortably.
And it's not standing at all anymore, is it? Yeah, gone.
No, it burned in the early 90s, around 93 or 94 it actually burned.
What's the site being used for now?
There was a gas station there for a while, and then somebody else bought it, and they put a building up, and they had like a repair facility, like they worked on cars and things like that, but now it's just a vacant area.
And it's over by Sleeper?
It's at the 140 mile marker, right at that 140 exit there.
All right. The other thing I've heard, and so you're the 18th interviewee of this project, and our goal is to get to 20 by the end of August, so we're close. One thing I've heard from several truckers is that they had their places they stopped. Was that part of the building up the business, was to sort of convince whether truck lines or individual truckers to make that one of your stops? Right,
that was always one of the big things, because in Laclede County there were several smaller stops that sold fuel, and they also had food and things like that. So that was always the big thing, is you always wanted to be the draw. Either had more parking, faster pumps, better food, better coffee, things like that.
Yeah. I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard before that truck stops can be areas where like prostitution occurs, and
there's all kinds of things
human trafficking going on, and back in the 50s and 60s they ever talk about it was hard to keep people from whatever doing.
Back then it wasn't as big of a deal as it is nowadays, because back then the state patrol had a little bit more bite to them. They could they could get out and thump somebody in the head if they needed to, or things like that.
Yeah.
It was just a different world back then. It wasn't near as bad. You might have somebody selling a little bit of marijuana in the parking lot, but it wasn't like today where you've got methamphetamine and cocaine and the harder drugs and things like that.
Yeah. What about drivers who need to stay awake?
No, back then.
Coffee.
Yeah, a lot of the drivers, back in the 60s and 70s, they started getting like the different pills and things like that. But even then, a lot of that stuff didn't happen as much, or if it did, it was kind of hitting a little bit better, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Another big part of this is communication. So now they all have mobile phones, I'm guessing, and the trucks themselves are almost like smart vehicles.
They've all got satellites, and
company knows where they're at all times, and But back then, stopping at the truck stop was also like a communication.
Yeah. Stop at a truck stop and you'd use a payphone or call collect back to the terminal and find out where your next load was, or tell them where you're at, or if you broke down or behind or ahead of schedule or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if the company knew that driver always stopped at certain truck stops, they would call a truck stop and say, whenever this guy gets here, tell him to call in, or give him this message, or tell him something's happened at home, or whatever the situation was.
Yeah. And also truckers would exchange information about road conditions and construction accidents, bad weather, either direction, that kind of stuff at the truck stop. Today's truck stops are, they have the canopies over the pumps, they're always paved. I'm guessing back then it was gravel.
Yeah, a lot of gravel, open pumps out in the weather, and one of the kids of the owner would probably run out and slammed the fuel pump down in there and went to try to wipe your windshield off the best he could, and all that stuff.
Oh, so it was actually somebody who would come out and serve you.
My dad worked there, my aunts and my uncles worked there, and all that. So it was kind of a family deal.
Now, I don't mean to pry, but you could make some money running a truck stop back in the 50s, 60s?
Back then you could, especially on tips. If you were a younger lady or something like that, you could go in there and flirt with the truckers a little bit and get a better tip or whatever.
And I'm sure I've heard from others. We've interviewed some female truckers too, and there's a whole thing going on there. But your family did all right. And,
provide for their family and all that, and
Yeah.
I mean, they were very well known. If you talk to the older generation from around this area, everybody knows about Andy's Midway, and
Yeah.
you know.
So what happened? Why did they sell it?
My grandfather died, and my grandmother just couldn't keep it going by herself anymore.
Yeah. Did she sell it or did she just
She ended up selling it, and another group of people bought it, and they put a restaurant in for a while, and they've actually got another version of that restaurant in town now.
Oh yeah. Which one is that?
It's the Andy's Chinese. It's Andy's. No, it's the Midway restaurant. It's a Chinese restaurant in town.
Oh, okay. But that's the sort of the remnant, if you will, of
Yep, that's
Andy's Midway.
That's kind of the last incarnation of it, I guess.
Yeah. So your grandfather's name was Andy?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Did I ask you this? It was near Sleeper. Oh, you said the
140.
140 mile. Yeah. Okay. And there's an exit there.
Yep. There's an exit there. There's a newer gas station at that exit, and what's left of it you can still see. It's on the southeast corner of that.
Southeast quadrant of that intersection is
Yep.
the old.
As soon as you
Andy's.
get off the interstate, you can see
Okay.
it there.
And we're at what, like 137 now?
129.
129. Okay, so it's about 11 miles farther down. I may try to get out there because I was like looking for it the other
Yep.
one time.
It's like the gas station part of it is there, and there's that building they've added on to. It's,
All right.
it's there, but that's where it was.
That's where it was. Okay, I'll go take a look at it, take some photos. There were a lot of truck stops, like you say. You know, there's everything from.
A lot of them are smaller too, because nowadays
Yeah.
people think of truck stops and they think, 150, 200 trucks, or
Right.
they think these big mega truck stops. Back then, if you could put 3, 4, 5 trucks somewhere, that was a truck stop.
Yeah, right. And I mean, there were a lot of. I know there were a lot of motor courts kind of thing. And we have 6 cabins,
Yep.
a little restaurant, and 1 pump, and that was it. You know,
Yep.
and if you were pumping gas, pretty much anybody could stop. You know, whether it was a truck or a car. Or, do you know, was most of their, how did their business sort of divide up? Was it 50% trucks, 50% vehicles? Was it?
I'm not real sure about that. That's one of those things that there's a lot of questions that later in life I wish I would have asked before my grandmother
Yeah.
passed. But
Yeah. The other thing, you mentioned the tips, but also, again, what I've heard, just being a John Q. Public, is that, the typical come and go gas station today or whatever, they're not making money on the gas per se.
Right.
They're making money on the beer and the
Right.
cigarettes.
it was
and
like that back then.
the snacks. It was, get them in the store.
Yeah. Yeah. They always, and if you look at a lot of the Route 66 things, a lot of them always had some kind of hook or some kind of gimmick. They would try to
Yeah.
get people to come in off the highway and things like that.
Yeah.
They always had the sign, world's best cup of coffee or world's best pie or something like that. They always try
Yeah.
to entice somebody in with something.
So when did the interstate come in through here, do you know?
I believe through town here, it was December of '58 is whenever it was opened through here. And then it was divided where, like, the eastbound lane was part of I-44 and the original 66 was like the westbound
Westbound
lane,
lane,
something
yeah.
like that.
Well, they built
It was divided, it was, Route 66 became I-44 through
Right.
here.
So out there at 140, it
it
just
was-
pretty
it
much
was-
incorporated the road.
Yep, they would have been sitting like in the median today, basically. They would have
Yeah.
been, in the middle until all 4 lanes were completed I-44 and then, shifted over.
So that must have been great for your grandparents because they didn't sort of get cut off by.
They were right in the middle for a number of years because the Gasconade Bridge down there, when they crossed I-44, that was one of the last sections of I-44 that was put in.
Uh-huh.
So there was, a lot of years there where they were kind of in the middle of the interstate.
Yeah. So do you know what hours they were officially open?
I don't know.
But they must have had at least 2 shifts if they
Yeah.
opened at 6 in the morning, close at 10 or something.
Probably. I
Yeah.
don't know exactly what the hours would have been. but-
Must have been long hours though for you.
Yeah, but the traffic also wasn't as heavy either, so at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, that might have been kind of the cutoff too, so.
Yeah. So again, a lot of truckers seem to prefer driving at night now. Less traffic, less 4-wheelers driving around, and all the things that impaired through alcohol and all kinds of weird stuff that happens at night. But back then, it was pretty much more of a daylight kind of traffic.
She talked a lot about the truck drivers that drive overnight too, because you could always tell the older drivers that did it, because their fingers would always be burned. They'd, smoke cigarettes down, and they didn't have the filters on them. So, a lot of times, they'd be driving along, and that cigarette would get down, that would burn their fingers, and kind of
They
keep
were
them awake.
smoking pole malls or
Yep.
something.
Yeah, they were rolling themselves,
Camel
driving down the
straights or
road,
something.
driving down the road, driving with their knee, trying to roll a cigarette up, things like that.
And they'd burn their fingers.
Yeah, so you can always tell them, because they always had burn marks all over their hands.
And you mentioned heat too, so probably not a lot of air conditioning in those vehicles back then either.
They were kind of spotty at best if they
Yep.
worked.
And we've had a, you know, kind of a prolonged hot spell here, kind of highs in the 90s for, I don't know, 2 weeks now. So it would have been tough if you were a driver. It might have been, you know, maybe you prefer daytime driving, but you might have switched to night when it gets hot like that.
Yeah, and a lot of the drivers too, you know, the truck stops back then, and as far as I know, Andy's Midway never had, but a lot of the truck stops would have actually bunk houses in them where you could go in there and rent a bed for 6 hours or 8 hours, whatever, and there might be 20 guys in there asleep or 10 people in there asleep.
And just kind of
Because a lot of the trucks didn't have sleepers on at that point in time.
Right.
And some of the drivers I talked to said you didn't want one of the early ones because you'd, you know, about getting pneumonia and dying in the middle of the winter. They didn't have any heat in them, you know. You know, that $1.50 for a hotel room was a lot better than getting pneumonia and dying out there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that too. So a lot of those they didn't have sleepers. So, but as far as you know, Andy's didn't have.
As far as I know, they never had the bunkhouse.
Yeah.
And before Andy's, there was actually it was actually a Brownie's truck stop.
Oh, okay. So it was existing before you
It was
before your grandparents
it
bought
was
it.
existing since I believe the 30s, but it was, you know, different names and things like that.
Yeah. Did you ever hear any stories about when it was Brownies or?
No, I've only seen 1 or 2 pictures of it.
Yeah. So as a truck stop, it existed from the 30s up till the early 80s. So maybe as long as 50.
They crossed the road at one point because they built it whenever Andy's took it over. He built a new building across the street from it, basically.
Yeah.
And because at the time when they first took it over from Brownie's, they were actually living upstairs in like an apartment above the truck stop.
Oh, really?
And then
they lived out there.
Yeah, and then they moved across the road from it, and they built a new building with a bigger restaurant and all that.
Yeah. The other thing I've heard about 66 that a lot of people forget is how, 2 things related. One is how narrow it is. It was like 9 feet wide in a lane. And with very little shoulder, or many of the drivers talked about those infamous.
The safety edge.
Yeah. That would, you know, 2 things they would comment about. You get up there and if you could get thrown back into traffic, or you go down a hill and then there was a cutout in the safety edge for water to flow off, and boy, you hit that with, you know, big load, and you got all kinds of problems.
And they'd fill up with water too.
Yeah, and but you know, really no shoulders like we have now. So you know, and then the related thing was just it was not particularly safe. You ever hear about any from your grandparents about any bad accidents in this area?
There were some accidents, you know, there was, where they were at, that was kind of curvy right before you got to the station.
Yeah.
And they had, I know, a couple cars that rolled over right there, going around the corners too fast and things like that, and losing control in the corners. And there was a narrow bridge about 3 miles before you get there. It's been widened out now, but that was also a real bad spot, and there was always head-on accidents there.
Really?
And even the Gasconade River Bridge down there, it's extremely narrow. A lot of the truck drivers have to fold the mirrors in when they went across, otherwise they'd smack mirrors when they passed each other.
And now they're trying to save that bridge.
Yeah.
It's MoDOT's not sure they need it anymore. I guess that used to be like, you know, if they had to close 44 for any reason, that would be the alternative route. Yeah. But the bridge is no longer.
Yeah, it's no longer safe and feasible. They didn't put enough money into it over the years to kind of maintain it. It's just, you know, deteriorated too far now.
Yeah.
Of course, that bridge is close to 100 years old now. It was built in 1956.
And there's been some, you know, I don't know if floods have compromised it at all, but there've been some major floods down there too. Since I've lived here, I've only lived here 6 years, and there was one time where the water was just right on the shoulder, about 3 inches from getting onto the pavement itself. Well, pretty close to closing 44.
Well, a little over a year ago, last May, not this past May, but a year ago, you know, it washed a lot of the asphalt actually off the road, and it undermined the shoulder and all that. And that's why it was shut down for about 4 days.
That was that big. I've forgotten about that, but yeah, that was a big spring flood. Now, again, I don't know the trucking business, but today, if you break down, they have service vehicles that'll come out.
Right.
did they do that back then, or did you have to sort of somehow get to
A lot of the guys back then that drove were actually mechanics themselves, and they had to know how to get it fixed, or at least get it off the road, or far enough up the road they could actually fix it right,
or they might thumb a ride into your place to get a part? Did you know they carry parts and stuff?
I think they might carry just a handful, but
Belts and stuff.
just some
Kind
common,
of the common stuff.
yeah, common batteries and things like that, headlights, and I
Yeah.
don't think they went, too in depth with that kind of stuff.
Tire technology probably wasn't what it was back then, is it like it is today?
Back then, a driver could change a tire on the side of the road. They had, brims that would come apart, and they could use the air off the truck if it had, air on it. And they could air their own tires up, things like that.
Really?
Nowadays, there's no way you could do that with a tire.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, the lug nuts just alone, you have to have a bigger impact gun just to get the lug nuts off. Or back then, they could use hand tools to get the lug nuts off.
Yeah. Is jacking it up, I mean, that's gotta be pretty tough.
Yeah.
Even back then.
Yeah. Especially if you're on a shoulder somewhere and it's raining, the jack's just gonna get pushed in the ground. It's
Right,
not gonna
right,
lift the
right.
truck up or
Yeah.
anything.
Any other stories your grandparents told you about?
There were some gypsies that come in one time, and they read my grandmother's fortune, and she always talked about that, and the gypsies.
Was it a good, positive fortune?
Well, she said that it was one of those things where everything they said was true, so.
They tell her your net worth is gonna go down real soon here as soon as we.
Well, they told her about like my grandfather, how he was gonna die, and so they were right about that, said it was gonna be kind of a long deal, but he wasn't gonna suffer during it and things like that, so I mean, they were right about some of that stuff, I guess.
Really?
Yeah, it was just it kind of surprised her, I think, like, looking back later in life.
Yeah. Any stories about, the blacks traveling along Route 66 or Hispanics? Today's drivers, I'd guess, are a pretty diverse group. Maybe not so much back then. Any stories about?
Not really. I mean, I remember her talking about some of the places in the country they had us set in separate rooms or back rooms, or they only,
Right.
serve them out the back door. But
Some towns had what they called sundown laws. It's
Yeah.
like, you're welcome to be here during the daylight, but
I
get
don't
out
really
of
remember
town.
ever talking about what it was like there, but I mean, I think a lot of that too was kind of people were kind of scared back then, so they might have been more apt to just kind of knock on the back door and say what they wanted, or make an order through the back door kind of deal, so they might have. But as far as I know, they never were, racist or prejudiced or said, we've got a special area for you.
They served everybody.
As far as I know, they did.
Yeah. Beggars, transients, hitchhikers.
That was kind of back to the whole bartering thing I was talking about.
Yeah.
They'd put people to washing dishes or doing different, jobs around there, mowing the grass or something like that.
Really?
They'd feed them.
Yeah. Do you know how many employees they had at any given time?
I think it was only just a handful, maybe 5 or 6 with the waitresses and cook staff and things like that.
And the waitresses were pretty much always women. Yeah.
As far as I know, that all the ones that worked there were. I've heard her, when she was still alive, I know she talked about a couple different ones.
Yeah. Did she ever mention female truckers?
No, not really. I don't remember anything about.
All right. Well, anything else you want to share with people who are listening to this oral history about? You're the first person we've interviewed that's been affiliated with a truck stop. So we've talked to people in trucking firms, we've talked to truck drivers, various, everything from VPs down to, office personnel and whatnot. But you're the first person affiliated with a truck stop. So, I mean, it was part of the big, sort of the whole ecosystem, I guess you'd say, or, the truck stop was an important part of that whole thing.
Yeah, it's kind of the hub of activity for a highway, one way or another.
Yeah.
That's kind of what kept the cars going and kept things moving.
Now today, there's, I don't know, it's like, there are truck stop chains.
Right.
I guess you'd say.
About everything nowadays is all big chains. There's just a handful of mom and pop, truck stops left.
Yeah.
Most of the truck drivers know exactly where they're at, and they'll make a point to stop there if they can.
Yeah. But back in the 50s and 60s, I mean, did your grandparents have to sort of confront that we have to grow to survive?
I think the big thing was like the oil crisis in the 70s. That was kind of the big thing they really had to compete with, because the bigger chains were obviously the first in line to get their fuel, where they had to kind of wait in line or kind of fight for it. So.
Yeah. I wonder if some of those big chains actually sort of like, pre-buy almost. I know the airlines do.
Yeah.
They're.
Well, they probably say like standing orders. They say every week we need X amount of tankers and we need X amount of fuel delivered here, here, and here.
Right. Was getting getting a fuel delivery, just when things are okay, normal situation, they'd tell the supplier, come in once a week or whatever, or once a month, or I don't know how long.
And I don't know how it is nowadays, but back then, whenever they ordered fuel, they had to pay for it when the fuel basically showed up. So if the fuel price dropped the next day and the guy across the street got fuel that was cheaper, he was selling fuel cheaper than you were because you paid an extra 3 cents a gallon for it, or 2 cents a gallon, or whatever the difference was.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do it like that, or if it's prorated now, or how they do that. But
It seems to me like, it's more, you go to an intersection with 4 gas stations, the gas will be all the same price. They kind of price it whatever it is at that location, but you can go half mile down the road and it'll be 5 cents cheaper or 5 cents more expensive. Right. It's kind of an opportunity thing, I guess. People just think we got to stop and get some gas, get some food. And like you said, the main sort of profit margin wasn't in the gas anyway. It was in
everything else you had.
Everything else. There were only 2 types of fuel, 2 types of gasoline, regular and used to call it ethyl premium.
Yeah, then you had the diesel fuel.
Yeah.
Then later on, they started bringing out the off-road diesel fuel because of road taxes and things like that.
Yeah. But no grain alcohol mixed in like they do today.
No, and one of the things too that she talked about was a lot of the gas stations would sell used engine oil. A lot of people wouldn't have the money necessarily to buy new engine oil to have the oil change in their car.
Really?
So they had big barrels in the back that were, they just dumped the oil.
The stuff that they'd taken out of another
which
car.
is still better than, what you had apparently. So they would just keep mixing the changed oil into it. There's always somebody bringing a new car in to get the oil changed, and they want a new oil, so you always had fairly new oil in there.
Yeah. I wonder if they had a way they could sort of, know what the balance of new, overall, was it pretty good oil or not so good oil, or ready to break down or something. Some of the bigger truck stops now, they'll offer washing services, and boy, some of those shops now, man, it's amazing.
Yeah.
This is all small operation, and they didn't have much in the way of amenities, and
No, I think back then it was kind of crude and just kind of what you needed to get by. It wasn't, they weren't worried about dentist offices and doctor's offices and get your DOT physical done and things like that. And how good the Wi-Fi was, that wasn't a big priority back then.
Now, what about waste stations? That was probably a big deal back then, to have to stop at the waste station.
I think it was more of an inspection station back in the 50s and 60s. The scales I don't think really came out real big until the 70s.
Really?
But I think that they still had the checkpoints and things like that where they'd have to stop, and all the drivers knew what time of day they shut down for lunch and what time they closed, went home for the night and all that. So they're all 5 or 10 miles up the road.
So it wasn't so much being overload or having a sort of a poorly loaded load where you had a lot of weight over the front or back or whatever. But
it was more just trying to see if the truck was safe and things like that. And a lot of guys trying to avoid that.
Would they sometimes check the driver too to see how groggy he was, or
Yeah, then some of the places would stop and say, "Oh, it looks like you're kind of heavy." It's like, "Oh yeah, we're about 2 pallets of strawberries, overweight. Here you go, boss."
So overall, you'd say that it's a pleasant family memory now for you that your
For the most part.
grandparents ran this.
Yeah.
Did your parents get involved in it at all?
My dad worked there a little bit, but by the time he got old enough to move out and all that, he went, off to do his own thing and all that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for speaking with us.
Yep, no problem.
I appreciate it. Thanks for coming in.
Yep.